Hello and welcome. I am Christopher John Bjerknes. It is June 19th, 2022. Today I am going to be discussing the Übermensch, or Superman. This is a philosophical, political, and religious doctrine that there is a class of superior human beings who are intellectually and physically superior to lesser common human beings, and that these supermen, or Übermensch, have the right and the self-obligation to be amoral, immoral, and mistreat the common man, abuse, take advantage of the common man, become the leader of the common man, so that they can assert their will over the common people, dominate them, rule them, and exploit them. Human beings, like other herd animals, have always formed hierarchical societies in which the leadership is often based on bloodlines, gender, wealth, physical prowess, and other advantages. Ancient minds fashioned the gods in the same mold as their parents and rulers, and made the gods into the masters of humanity and the lords over chaos, who imposed their will and order upon the primordial sea of chaos. Some religions teach that in order for a man to rise to the top rung of the ladder of being and surpass even the gods on his quest to become perfect, a man must ascend to heaven, slay the gods, and take their place as masters of creation and the cosmos, and they believe that this goal is obtainable. The adept who pursues this religious quest will then become the ultimate Superman, or Übermensch. According to Satanists, Lucifer provided humanity with the finest example of the ideal Superman, because he rebels against God and desires to rule a world of his own where his will alone is supreme. The ultimate ambition of the Superman, or Übermensch, is to turn himself into a god and kill off the ancient gods by disbelieving in them and placing himself and like-minded men and women in the place of the ancient gods as the highest beings in existence who are worshipped by lesser men. The pervasive belief in the Superman has a long religious and political history. The pharaohs of Egypt and ancient Roman emperors believed that they were demigods and were worshipped as demigods by the masses. They believed that they carried the divine seed within them and would fully become gods in their afterlife. The Romans and Israelites anticipated the arrival of a quasi-divine Messiah figure who would provide salvation to humanity and usher in a new golden age. Of course, this demigod Messiah figure would be an Übermensch, or Superman, who could dictate his own morality to all of humanity. These leaders exemplified the original form of the Übermensch. They thought that they contained the spark of their gods in their minds and bodies, which enabled them to transcend regular human beings and rule over normal common people. They were subject to no one's will but their own, and their will was the will of the gods, because the gods would not have put them on the throne were it not so. Kings and queens asserted a divine right to rule, because the gods had granted them their authority, and as such, anyone who rebelled against those kings or queens was rebelling against the gods who had placed them on the throne. In effect, they claimed to be the presence of the divine in the world and maintained that they were superior to common men and women. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato called for the establishment of a class of philosopher kings to rule over lesser beings as supermen, as Übermensch, as intellectually and physically superior people who had this divine right to rule. The ancient mystery religions promised their followers that they could unveil the divine sparks of their own souls and ascend to the godly realm through the practice of certain rites and the attainment of the knowledge and wisdom of the mysteries that the priests would teach to them. The beliefs and practices of these secret societies evolved into the spiritual alchemy of Freemasonry, Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, Martinism, Satanism, and other occult secret societies. These promised to turn the base metals of regular men into the gold of supermen and transform mundane men into gods and god slayers. Members of these secret societies who showed promise were selected to become political, religious, and academic leaders in society. Their amoral code is based on the principle, do as thou wilt. They believe that they have transcended good and evil, and that the end justifies the means. In other words, they can act in any way they choose because they have believed that they have become gods, that their consciousness has ascended to the level of the gods, and they view themselves as intellectually and physically superior to all others, and therefore they have the supposed right and self-obligation to exploit and make use of others, just as the gods make use of chaos to give it whatever form and order they so choose. Spiritual alchemy is nihilistic in that it first destroys human nature with self-hatred and then supplants it with narcissism and a psychopathic personality through self-glorification that promises to close the wound of self-hatred that was just rent in the individual who is being transformed through spiritual alchemy into an Übermensch. It's somewhat like basic training where a soldier is physically and mentally abused to break them down and then is recreated into a killer who feels no moral compunction not to commit murder against other human beings because they know that they are acting in their own self-interest and utilizing their will to survive in order to survive combat. Since the leadership class has the power and the will to shape major events in human history, numerous philosophers have asserted that great men and women, superior men and women, supermen and superwomen, make history what it is, was, and will be through the force of their individual will, which is derived from the ultimate divine will, or the metaphysical will of the cosmos itself. The individual Übermensch is therefore thought to be a microcosm within himself or herself of the entire cosmos, and his will is supposedly a manifestation of the universal will become incarnate. The Übermensch fashions destiny because destiny created his magnificent nature and enabled him to place himself in power through the might of his own will, which infinitely exceeds that of the lesser men and women who bind themselves in the inhibiting chains of morality, which render them weak, meek, and powerless before the cunning, deceptive, and often murderous Übermensch. These philosophers look to Napoleon Bonaparte as the prime example of the Übermensch, And I will show you how this evolved through various philosophers, novelists, and others. The term Übermensch was coined by the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. I'm going to read from the Wikipedia article on Nietzsche in the subsection Übermensch. Another concept important to understanding Nietzsche is the Übermensch, Superman. Writing about nihilism in Also sprach Zarathustra, Nietzsche introduced an Übermensch. According to Lawrence Lamper, the death of God must be followed by a long twilight of piety and nihilism. Zarathustra's gift of the Overman is given to mankind, not aware of the problem to which the Overman is the solution. Zarathustra presents the Übermensch as the creator of new values, and he appears as a solution to the problem of the death of God and nihilism. The Übermensch does not follow the morality of common people, since that favors mediocrity, but rises above the notion of good and evil and above the herd. In this way, Zarathustra proclaims his ultimate goal as the journey towards the state of the Übermensch. Again, this is kind of like the ancient mystery religions where the spark of the divine is unveiled so that the adept, the student of the mystery religions, can ascend to the realm of the gods and realize, become aware of, and make use of his higher spiritual nature. He wants a kind of spiritual evolution of self-awareness and overcoming of traditional views on morality and justice that stem from the superstitious beliefs still deeply rooted or related to the notion of God and Christianity. From Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Zarathustra's prologue, pages 9 through 11. Quoting from Nietzsche. I teach you the Übermensch. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? All beings so far have created something beyond themselves, and you want to be the ebb of that great tide, and would rather go back to the beast than overcome man. What is the ape to man? A laughingstock or a painful embarrassment. And just the same shall be man to the Übermensch, a laughingstock or painful embarrassment. Again, there's this need to degrade others in order to elevate the self into something unnatural, amoral, that is generated through the intellect instead of through tradition and human nature itself. You have made your way from worm to man, and much within you is still worm. Once you were apes, and even yet man is more of an ape than any ape. Again, there is this self-degradation, this self-hatred, which tears down the individual so that there can be a blank slate upon which these philosophers and secret societies can create a psychopathic individual who has a basic hatred of normal people and feels justified in abusing and mistreating them because this newly created individual perceives him or herself as a god among animals and has the right to shepherd the herd even over the cliff to its own destruction, if that is what the will of that individual and his superiors want to have happen. Once you were apes, and even yet man is more of an ape than any ape, Even the wisest among you is only a conflict and hybrid of plant and ghost. In other words, chaos and order, body and intellect. But do I bid you become ghosts or plants? Behold, I, the wisest among you, is only a behold, I teach you the Übermensch. The Übermensch is the meaning of the earth. Let your wills say, the Übermensch shall be the meaning of the earth. Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Übermensch, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and a going under. This again relates to the ancient mystery schools, which taught that there is a higher divine realm, and then there is the lower realm of the earth and chaos, and between the two there is an abyss, which is overcome through the intellect and through mystical rites, which are taught by the mystery religions. Kabbalists believe that they can ascend the Sephirotic tree back up to the crown of the tree, which first emanated the light, and in this way they cross over the abyss through the use of the hidden Sephirah, De'at, or knowledge. They utilize their intellect to cross over from the chaotic realm to the divine realm. So it appears that Nietzsche's philosophy, whether he knew it or not, is identical to what the ancient occult mystery religions taught about transforming yourself from a common basic person into a righteous prophet who has seen the map of the universe and the map of God and creation. Christianity teaches the same mystical path to the reunion with the God that emitted everything, to transform an individual into his divine self and to separate his soul from his chaotic being and elevate it to a higher level, which then gives him the right to lead, abuse, and mistreat others. There was a Scotsman, Thomas Carlyle, who created the great man theory, which is akin to all of these beliefs, that great men have the divine will within them, and that great men manufacture history. History does not manufacture great men. And great men are able to do this because they have the divine will implanted within them as their fundamental nature. And it is a quest to find oneself within oneself, this ultimate will of the cosmos itself. And thereby the individual becomes a microcosm of the cosmos. Kabbalah has very similar beliefs in the idea of Adam Kadmon, the macrocosm, and the microcosm of the enlightened individual. The Wikipedia article on the great man theory states, the theory is primarily attributed to the Scottish essayist, historian, and philosopher Thomas Carlyle, who gave a series of lectures on heroism in 1840, later published as On Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History, in which he states, universal history, the history of what man has accomplished in this world, is at bottom the history of the great men who have worked here. They were the leaders of men, these great ones, the modelers, patterns, and in a wide sense, creators of whatsoever the general mass of men contrive to do or attain. All things that we see standing accomplished in this world are properly the outer material result, the practical realization and embodiment of thoughts that dwelt in the great men sent into the world. The soul of the whole world's history, it may justly be considered, were the history of these. This is very akin to the ancient idea that the Pharaoh or the Roman empires or the kings and queens ruled by divine right were demigods and molded history and gave order to chaos through their own personal will because they were in effect gods. Chaos did not order them, they ordered chaos. History does not create great men create history. And there's a strong, strong tradition of this, which I believe is directly tied to the ancient occult beliefs of the mystery schools and the ancient traditions of several religions, especially Satanism above all. Carlyle stated that the history of the world is but the biography of great men, reflecting his belief that heroes shape history through both their personal attributes and divine inspiration. Hegel, proceeding from providentialist theory, argued that what is real is reasonable. The real is the rational is the real. And world historical individuals are the world spirits agents. Hegel wrote, "Such are great historical men whose own particular aims involve those large issues which are the will of the world spirit." We have to ask, is the world spirit God or is the world spirit Satan in the minds of these people who believe that within themselves they have a spark of this world spirit that they can unveil, and then they have the right to dominate all others and impose their will on all others because they believe that they have ascended to the level of the gods, have slain the gods and taken the gods' place. And that is why they believe they have the right and self-duty to govern all others and to shape the future of mankind based upon their own personal beliefs without taking into consideration the will of anyone else, the self-determination of anyone else, or the rights of anyone else. Hegel developed a very complex philosophy based upon these beliefs, in which there's the Volksgeist, the spirit of the people. There is the Weltseele, which is the world spirit or the world ghost, the spirit of the universe. There's also the Zeitgeist, which is the spirit of the time, in which the great men mold the climate, the political, religious, aesthetic, ethical climate of any given era of history, and that history moves along as a result of the will of these superior people. Quoting from the Wikipedia article on the Hegelian concept, Germanic Hegelian, there's a long history of it throughout many cultures that Hegel solidified into his philosophy. Quoting from Hegel in this Wikipedia article, "In the course of history, one relevant factor is the preservation of a nation, while the other factor is the continued existence of a national spirit, Volksgeist. It is interrupted because it has exhausted and spent itself, so that world history, the world spirit, Weltgeist, proceeds." There is this concept in Hegelian philosophy that history is a process which is driven by these superior individuals, and these individuals are themselves governed by this mystical cosmic will that manifests itself, becomes incarnate through these superior people like Jesus Christ or Buddha or the Pharaoh or the Roman Emperor or Napoleon, who shape and mold the zeitgeist and drive history towards the perfection of history. Hegel's description of Napoleon as the world soul on horseback, die Weltseele zu Pferde, became proverbial. The phrase is a shortened paraphrase of Hegel's words in a letter written on 13 October 1806, the day before the Battle of Jena, to his friend Friedrich Emanuel Niethammer. I saw the emperor, this world soul, riding out of the city on reconnaissance. It is indeed a wonderful sensation to see such an individual who, concentrated here at a single point, astride a horse, reaches out over the world and masters it. Hegel's nemesis was another brilliant German philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer believed in this German idealism of the mind perceiving its own universe, which is not the real universe, but is time and space, along with Kant in the idea that the brain forms categorical imperatives of time and space that become our cognition of the universe, but that the universe itself is beyond all of our conscious conceptions of it. But that the universe has this driving will, which becomes the will to survive and the will of the individual, and that is how the universe creates itself, and how the consciousness is tied as a structure within the structure of everything else to create the illusion of the multiplicity of all the things that we perceive in time and space. But ultimately, the universe itself is timeless and spaceless. This is very similar to the Greek Eleatic conception of the one as espoused by Parmenides and Zeno and the other Eleatic philosophers. It became one of the fundamental tenets of the theory of relativity, William James's theory of the block universe, and several other quadra-dimensional theories of space-time. The world as will, quoting from the Wikipedia article on Arthur Schopenhauer. In Book 2 of The World as Will and Representation, Schopenhauer considers that the world is beyond the aspect of it that appears to us, that is, the aspect of the world beyond representation, the world considered in itself, Ding an sich, or noumena, its inner essence. The very being in itself of all things, Schopenhauer argues, is the will, Wille. The empirical world that appears to us as representation has plurality and is considered in a spatio-temporal framework, space and time. The world as thing in itself, Ding an sich, must exist outside the subjective forms of space and time. Although the world manifests itself to our experience as a multiplicity of objects, the objectivation of the will, each element of this multiplicity has the same blind essence striving towards existence and life. Human rationality is merely a secondary phenomena that does not distinguish humanity from the rest of nature at the fundamental, essential level. The advanced cognitive abilities of human beings, Schopenhauer argues, serve the ends of willing, an illogical, directionless, ceaseless striving that condemns the individual to a life of suffering unredeemed by any final purpose. In the time-space theories of Melchior Pilyagi, Henri Poincaré, and Hermann Minkowski, this becomes this block universe of space-time in which the world line and events and motion of world points exist in a motionless quadra-dimensional space-time, and that motion and space and time as individual dimensions exist only in cognition and not in reality, that in reality everything is this one of space-time. Again, this is all simply a repetition of what Parmenides and the Eleatic Greek philosophers had thought. But it makes everything deterministic, even beyond deterministic. Everything exists and simply is forever. And what we perceive of as simultaneous events are simply what our human cognition and our human will creates as part of our structure within that superstructure of everything. And therefore, morality becomes relativistic as well, because it is simply a manifestation of the will of the superior human being, the superior Übermensch. The Russian nihilists picked up on this concept that everything has to be torn down so that it can then be rebuilt from nothing. These nihilists saw themselves as these Ubermensch, superior human beings who had gone beyond the concept of good and evil and asserted that their master intellect and their superior physical prowess, as demonstrated by their ability to destroy, enabled them to become gods who could break all the order down so that it became absolute chaos once again, and then they could provide order, structure, and form to this chaos, whatever order, structure, and form their own individual will and superior intellect inspired them to create. And they could then use the common masses, the inferior human beings, the cattle, as their slaves to reformulate chaos into a new ordered form, following the order of their own individual will. Fyodor Dostoevsky was deeply concerned about these nihilistic tendencies in Russian society, and he sought to expose them, demonstrate how evil they are, and the inherent dangers in this religious, political, and amoral philosophy of nihilism, which is very much akin to this concept of the great men of the Übermensch. And he wrote a novel in which he created a fictional character, Rodion Raskolnikov, who conceived of himself as one of these Ubermensch, as a superior person who believed that he was physically and intellectually superior to others, and some of those others had greater wealth than he had, and therefore he was justified in utilizing his cleverness, his superior intellect, to commit murder against these lesser beings and take from them their wealth and whatever else they had, and that he was fully justified in doing this because he had gone beyond good and evil and morality, and therefore viewed himself as the highest being who had no noblesse oblige to the lower beings, and therefore could steal from them everything that they had, including their lives. The Wikipedia article states about Dostoevsky's novel Crime and Punishment. Crime and Punishment follows the mental anguish and moral dilemmas of Rodion Raskolnikov, an impoverished ex-student in St. Petersburg who plans to kill an unscrupulous pawnbroker, an old woman who stores money and valuable objects in her flat. He theorizes that with the money he could liberate himself from poverty and go on to perform great deeds, and seeks to convince himself that certain crimes are justifiable if they are committed in order to remove obstacles of the higher goals of extraordinary men. This is again the Nietzschean concept that the end justifies the means. Once the deed is done, however, he finds himself racked with confusion, paranoia, and disgust. His theoretical justifications lose all their power as he struggles with guilt and horror and confronts both the internal and external consequences of his deed. Dostoevsky was fully justified in his fears about the nihilist anarchists and what became the Bolsheviks in Russia. Leon Trotsky, Vladimir Lenin, and Joseph Stalin all perceived of themselves as these supermen. They set about to spill oceans of blood and killed 30 million people by 1923. Lenin imposed his will on the entire nation under the pretext of democratic centralism, in which his ideas became the will of the entire nation. He was very dogmatic and believed that whatever Marx had said was the divine authority of the divine will and became the material destiny of all of humanity, because through his individual cleverness, Lenin was able to impose his will on the masses and destroy them nihilistically and tear down all of society under the delusional pretext that he would eventually create a workers' paradise, which he knew would never come. He also believed in permanent revolution, and especially Trotsky believed in permanent revolution and permanent war, where this would be an ongoing process of destruction, where the Übermensch, the superior men, would destroy all other men. Adolf Hitler took on this same belief in the Uebermensch, that he was the ultimate Übermensch who would, through his will, dominate all of German society and bring about this Hegelian transformation of history into the ultimate perfection of history in a messianic tausendjähriger Reich, a 1,000-year empire that he would initiate. And he also utilized the concept of Ermächtigungsgesetz and Gleichschaltung, which were taken from Lenin's concept of democratic centralism to impose his will on all of German society and transform it into his vision of what it ought to be. Again, Dostoevsky was responding to Russian nihilism, and he was seeking to enlighten people as to the dangers that it presented. So he created this character Raskolnikov, to exemplify the mindset of the Übermensch and of the Russian nihilist. The Wikipedia article on crime and punishment states, nihilism, rationalism, and utilitarianism. Dostoevsky's letter to Katkov reveals his immediate inspiration, to which he remained faithful even after his original plan evolved into a much more ambitious creation, a desire to counteract what he regarded as nefarious consequences arriving from the doctrines of Russian nihilism. In the novel, Dostoevsky pinpointed the dangers of both utilitarianism and rationalism, the main ideas of which inspired the radicals, continuing a fierce criticism he had already started with his Notes from the Underground. Dostoevsky utilized the characters, dialogue, and narrative in Crime and Punishment to articulate an argument against westernizing ideas. He thus attacked a peculiar Russian blend of French utopian socialism and Benthamite utilitarianism, which had developed under revolutionary thinkers such as Nikolai Chernyshevsky, and became known as rational egoism. The radicals refused to recognize themselves in the novel's pages, since Dostoevsky pursued nihilistic ideas to their most extreme consequences. Dmitry Pisarev ridiculed the notion that Raskolnikov's ideas could be identified with those of the radicals of the time. The radicals' aims were altruistic and humanitarian. Well, we could see what their aims were when Trotsky came along. But they were to be achieved by relying on reason and suppressing the spontaneous outflow of Christian compassion. Chernyshevsky's utilitarian ethic proposed that thought and will in man were subject to the laws of physical science. Dostoevsky believed that such ideas limited man to a product of physics, chemistry, and biology, negating spontaneous emotional responses. In its latest variety, Russian nihilism encouraged the creation of an elite of superior individuals to whom the hopes of the future were to be entrusted. Raskolnikov exemplifies the potentially disastrous hazards contained in such an ideal. And again, that manifested in Trotsky, Lenin, Stalin, and Kaganovich. And these men mass murdered tens of millions, perhaps almost 100 million people in the Russian Empire, in the name of being the superior individual who was going to destroy everything so that they could reconstruct it according to the will and according to their mythologies, their Marxist mythologies. He even becomes fascinated with the majestic idea of a Napoleonic personality who, in the interests of a higher social good, believes that he possesses a moral right to kill. Indeed, his Napoleon-like plan impels him towards a well-calculated murder, the ultimate conclusion of his self-deception and utilitarianism. This is referring to Raskolnikov's character in Crime and Punishment. I brought that up just to demonstrate that, again, Napoleon appears again and again as the example of the Übermensch, the superior individual whose will shapes history. This was also picked up by Ayn Rand, who I believe was a Russian agent of the communists who was sent to America at the tail end of the Trust operation to subvert all anti-communist movements in America and to make them forward communist ambitions by creating a class of useful idiots who believed that they were transforming themselves into the Übermensch by becoming psychopathic and completely amoral and individualistic in ways which would undermine the cohesiveness of Western civilization and destroy us from within. And I believe that was Ayn Rand's role. She was a novelist who was heavily promoted by communist Hollywood, which is ironic because she always portrayed herself as an anti-communist so that she could infiltrate true anti-communist movements and subvert them so that they forwarded communist aims. In her novel, The Fountainhead, the main character is named Howard Rourke. He is one of these psychopaths who perceives of himself as an ideal man with the right to lead other men and to break with all traditions and impose his will on everyone else. She tries to present him as if he's an ethical man, but what she's really doing is creating a character. Instead of ridiculing this character as Dostoevsky did, she is trying to create a hero, make this a heroic character to be emulated by our best citizens, so that our best citizens pursue this amoral path, abandon any sense of noblesse oblige, become completely selfish. She famously stated that selfishness is good and a virtue. So what she was doing was trying to undermine democratic society by removing all morality from democratic society, so that our privileged class, our elite, turn against the public and destroy American society in the name of being supermen who have the right to be amoral to the masses because they perceive of themselves as gods, as the Übermensch, and they perceive of the common man as an animal to be led to the slaughterhouse. Quoting from the Wikipedia article on Ayn Rand's novel, The Fountainhead, Rand's stated goal in writing fiction was to portray her vision of an ideal man. The character of Howard Rourke, the protagonist of The Fountainhead, was the first instance where she believed she had achieved this. Rourke embodies Rand's egoistic moral ideals, especially the virtues of independence and integrity. It's absolutely against the idea of integrity. It's instead promoting selfishness and individualism, breaking down and atomizing Western civilization so that our leadership attacks society at large, views itself as a cohesive elite in the name of individualism, which promotes its own wealth at the expense of the health of society. Rand indicated that the primary theme of The Fountainhead was individualism versus collectivism, not in politics, but within a man's soul. Again, this is inspiring a whole class which has evolved as a political class in America, especially among libertarians, to become psychopathic and selfish, to abandon any and all sense of social responsibility. This was also forwarded in her novel Atlas Shrugged, which again seeks to create a psychopathic elite who view themselves as being at war with the common man and utilize all of their advantages to destroy and corrupt society. A product of this subversion of communists who pretended to be anti-communists and patriotic citizens of America and other Western countries as they sought to utilize their positions of influence in academia and in the business world to undermine any sense of morality within our society and within our business communities were exemplified by the Frankfurt School and by such leading figures as Edward Bernays, Leo Strauss, Milton Friedman, Ludwig von Mises, and Murray Rothbard. Many of these people were associated with the libertarian movement, and they tried to create an ideology in which businessmen were encouraged to be completely amoral and immoral and to do whatever they could within the constraints of the law without having any sensibilities of ethics or morality. They proposed the idea that that would be the business of government and the legislature, who would constrain them through laws so that they could not do harm to society. But these were very sophisticated people, and they fully understood that these amoral psychopaths who viewed themselves as supermen, as the Uebermensch, would deliberately corrupt government and corrupt the legislature to favor their own ends, and would ensure that the legislature and the government would not only not protect the ethical, moral, and health interests of society at large, but would instead deliberately corrupt the laws to favor these amoral people in such ways that would deliberately do harm to society at large, stratify society, increase the wealth and income gap between the lowest echelon and the highest echelon. And the goal of the communists was always to undermine society and generate chaos, because chaos and instability and social unrest are the leaven of communist revolution. And they wanted to promote and destroy society so that the people would turn against this corrupt government that the wealthy class would create and further and empower to destroy society, so that society would then turn against its own government and engage in a communist revolution. So they always knew it was farcical that the legislature and government would create an ethical basis for the maintenance of society against amoral businessmen. They always fully understood that businessmen would control the media, would control politicians, and would have the ability to corrupt government and enact whatever legislation favored them against the general and best interests of the majority. All of these occult, all of these beliefs in the Übermensch and these communist societies are closely aligned to occultism and Satanism. They utilize secret societies to seek out and develop psychopathic personalities in people whom they slate to become our leaders, and they promote this process of escaping any sense of morality in the name of becoming a superior being, the way that the old mystery schools taught people that they could unveil the sparks of the divine within themselves and ascend to heaven. The occult societies promote the spiritual alchemism of the idea that they can transform the lead of their souls into the gold of their souls through coming to understand the knowledge and the wisdom that these secret societies impart to them, and through networking with other like-minded, often psychopathic persons to gain positions of power so that they can then corrupt society. Anyone who is interested in simple, direct, easily understood explanations of how spiritual alchemy is to occur, in other words, to gain access to the secrets of these secret societies, I recommend the book, The Kybalion, a study of the Hermetic philosophy of ancient Egypt and Greece. It is readily and freely available on the internet. It's a real classic of these ideas. And again, what I'm trying to do is stress the fact that this process of spiritual alchemy is directly related to this idea of the great man theory, the Übermensch, and the idea of transforming an individual away from his fundamental human nature, which they denigrate as being an ape-like nature, into becoming this supposedly divine spiritual will. But it is they who define what it is that this will wants. And these people often become slaves of more powerful people and do terrible things to society and other people, as evidenced by the Bolsheviks, by the Young Turks, and by other people who pursued this logical positivism, Marxist material determinism, and these other philosophies which abandon morality in the name of becoming the Übermensch. Androgyny is another one of the many things that they promote. Another book that is easily understood and I believe accurately portrays what it is that these secret societies teach to their initiates in the name of becoming superior people and in the name of a supposedly superior morality, which in fact is the morality that you can go beyond good and evil and the end justifies the means, is Max Heindel's book, Freemasonry and Catholicism. I want to get to the table of contents so you can see that this is all based on Satanism, the idea that Lucifer is the prototype, the archetype, and the role model for these people because Lucifer supposedly got in touch with the divine will of the chaotic universe, recognized God as a being who tries to impose an irrational order, that Lucifer is more rational than God, has his own will, and is destined to rule a world of his own and to slay God, and that the Übermensch is to emulate Lucifer and is to destroy society, impose his or her own will on the lesser ape-like beings who were created by God and therefore must be destroyed in the pursuit of fulfilling history, where the ultimate aim of the great men is to destroy the earth and destroy humanity. The QAnon movement and the libertarian movement and related political endeavors to undermine American society and to create delusions among the American people, believing in things which are obviously untrue, I think is closely affiliated with these same historical movements and the pattern of this idea that there should be a class of people who mislead the common public by appealing to their common beliefs so that they can obtain power. And once in power, they undermine all of those things which they pretended to espouse. They undermine religion, they undermine morality, they undermine national sovereignty, they set about to benefit our enemies, and they get themselves into power through this psychopathic, deceptive nature that they have, where they pretend to be highly moral and ethical in order to destroy all morality in society. They pretend to have a great secret hidden knowledge so that they can destroy all real knowledge. They are very nihilistic in the name of recapturing our traditions. I hope that this presentation has inspired you to think about things you had not thought about before. I hope you've learned a few things along the way. I have a website where you can find my books. It is CJBBooks.com. There will be a link to it in the description below. Please donate. There will also be a link in the description below to my PayPal donation page, where you can very easily make a donation that will help keep me going so I can continue to produce these videos. I want to do another one relating to what the actual philosophy of these people is, how it deviates from traditional philosophy, and how it is rooted in the ancient mystery religions of Orphism, the Eleusinian mysteries, the Samothracian mysteries, Pythagoreanism, the Egyptian mystery schools, Kabbalah, and occultism. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.